We'll exchange cards.
Yeah, will do.
Well, good afternoon. Be very welcome to this event. My name is Rodrigo Buenaventura. I'm the chair of the Spanish Security Supervisor, but that's my day job. Here I'm in my capacity as chair of the Sustainable Finance Task Force of IOSCO. And we are presenting today the new consultation of IOSCO on good practices of voluntary carbon markets. Let me thank first the Spain Pavilion for hosting us today, and thank our panelists and moderators. A couple of panelists are still to come, but they will come, so don't worry for that. So I'm really honored to present a very significant milestone in the IOSCO work on sustainable finance, as we unveil our consultation on good practices for voluntary carbon markets. In 2022, we delved into this issue of voluntary carbon markets, and the reason was very straightforward. Investors and corporates were looking into these markets in order to assist them with their mitigation objectives, and there are clear similarities with financial markets. In this market, as in financial markets, integrity is essential, but it was very clearly missing from the functioning of some corners and aspects of these markets. Since 2022, the idea that voluntary carbon markets, I will use the acronym VCMs from time to time, sorry, bear with me with that. VCMs require integrity. That idea has become mainstream. And this is important for voluntary carbon markets because companies in many countries, in all continents, are recurring to them as they set out the pathways to decarbonization, especially where compliance carbon markets have not yet been implemented or developed. And this instrument is particularly promising for emerging markets. But what do we mean by integrity when we speak of voluntary carbon markets? And is it different or not from other type of markets and financial markets? Well, the answer would be mostly no. They are not that different in this respect. And as you go through the consultation report, you will find a framework that sets forth IOSCO's vision for a market that fosters transparency, accountability, and credibility. And these principles are shared with the concept of integrity in financial markets. And many of these good practices, you will find in the report, are based upon more detailed regulatory frameworks already present in other type of asset classes. This is to a certain extent an uncommon situation in which we're in. Normally, financial markets grow and develop, and then they get the attention of financial regulators to tackle things like stability or integrity. In this case, there is a strong consensus about the fact that one of the reasons for the lack of growth of the market is the absence of regulation. Hence, for a change, regulation can actually be a factor in the development of the market and not the other way around, which is the normal situation. So we have tried to make a distinction between what we call environmental integrity and financial integrity. By environmental integrity, we mean the accuracy and the reliability of the carbon reduction claims. In other words, does the project do what it said it would do in terms of carbon reduction? And there are issues like the potential for lack of additionality, where offset projects might not result in emissions reductions that would have not happened otherwise naturally or due to regulations. There are issues like permanence of carbon sequestration. As you know, natural events can reverse the intended environmental benefits in some cases. But although addressing these vulnerabilities is critical for the credibility and the effectiveness of VCMs in contributing to global climate goals, this is not the area of expertise of financial regulators. And there are other entities better placed than IOSCO to deal with these environmental integrity issues. So while we must leave the fight for environmental integrities to others, or most of it, there is a second set of vulnerabilities that firmly falls within our scope of expertise, and those relate to financial integrity. And by these we mean the elements that are related to the issuance, the registry, the trading, and the information around the use of these products that are not hinging on the environmental features of the projects themselves. So IOSCO has decided to act to promote financial integrity in voluntary carbon markets, and we are doing that in three ways. First, by supporting the establishment of sound market structures and appropriate architecture for custody, trading, and settlement of these instruments. Second, by supporting transparency in markets to promote information symmetry, orderly and fair trading. And thirdly, by supporting adequate market conduct and behavior in order to prevent issues like fraud, market abuse, insider dealing, or outright scams. We began this process in November 2022, the last COP in Egypt, with a discussion paper setting out some key considerations for well-functioning VCMs, voluntary carbon markets, learning from existing markets with deeper histories of operation and activity. I think it's important to know that these did not come in a vacuum. Several organizations and projects have been promoting integrity for a while on these markets. Organizations like the Integrity Council, VCMI, ICVCM have done already important seminal work on this. But the IOSCO journey continues now with the publication of the consultation report, setting out what we think should be the good practices that regulators should consider when overseeing VCMs. We are proposing a list of 21 good practices, touching items like encouraging the application of proportionate regulation and legal and regulatory classification of VCMs and contract specifications, transparency in primary and secondary markets, standardization of a taxonomy of carbon credit attributes, open access to trading, governance and risk management, very important for this industry, and even more important, tackling conflicts of interest. There are several of those that can affect these products. And then a chapter, a number of good practices around market surveillance and a number of recommendations around the disclosure of the use of carbon credits by those who claim the carbon reduction. The consultation report we are publishing today is the result of extensive research, many discussions and deliberations, and I think the collective wisdom of experts and stakeholders within and outside IOSCO and across the globe, and the leadership of my esteemed colleagues Verena Ross, the chair of ESMA, and Russ Benham, the chair of the CFTC, US CFTC, who are here today with us, moderating the panel, and to whom I want to thank for making long flights to be here with us and for the work done so far leading this project. But we might not have got everything right in this consultation paper. We are truly interested on your views, on the views of stakeholders, and we are really inviting everybody to contribute to the development of a final report that would be ready next year, 2024, by responding to this consultation until early March and engaging actively with IOSCO. Your insights and your expertise are really valuable to this consultation and to shape a good set of good practices to bring transparency, integrity, and efficiency to voluntary carbon markets. I will now turn to our very interesting panel and to Verena and Russ to open up the discussion. But before that, I would like to leave you with two thoughts. For voluntary carbon markets to stand a chance, they will require globally scalable secondary markets where liquidity can build up. Now, it is important to stress that we as IOSCO, we are not recommending voluntary carbon markets over compliance carbon markets or the other way around. We are not suggesting that VCMs will be more or less effective or, for instance, what proportion of the cap and trade metrics in each jurisdiction should be allowed to be covered with VCMs. That's not where we are in the terrain we are reaching these good practices. This is a policy or even a political decision by jurisdictions, by countries. What we are just saying is if you want to develop proper VCM markets with the right integrity levels, this is the way we suggest you to go. And the second thought is that we are convinced that these good practices, of course, are a key contribution to the establishment of fair, stable, efficient markets, but it is very clear that others from around the world, both in the public and private sectors, must join. It is, I think, imperative that collectively we coordinate our efforts to scale these markets to the optimal efficiency, and for that we stand truly ready. Thank you very much, and I leave the floor to my colleagues to the very interesting panel that we have ahead of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rodrigo, for those very helpful introductory remarks, which I think set the scene very well for what we are here today to do, and that is to actually start off the discussion on the consultation paper that we issued today, to try to really get the input from the people who are working on the ground, trying to establish voluntary carbon markets, and trying to help us as regulators and supervisors with their advice and views on how can we best help that process along, what are the kind of good practices that might help us to create this type of market. And for that, we have a fantastic panel here. First of all, I want to also say that it has been great working with Russ on this endeavor. And so we will do this sharing of the panel together.
We don't get to moderate panels often, do we?
No.
We usually have to, we're interviewed. We're not doing interviewing.
Exactly. So we will be asking all the tough questions today and benefit from being on this side of the panel. And I'm very pleased to have such a great set of people. We're still missing one of the panelists who I hope will still arrive. But let's start, no means least, with the people who we have here already. And can I maybe ask each of you to briefly introduce yourself and what your link is to voluntary carbon markets and what you do. So I start with you, Corley, if I can.
That's what I get for sitting next to you. Hi, everyone. My name is Corley Leroux. I am from the UN Sustainable Stock Exchanges Initiative. So the SEC initiative works with exchanges, regulators, investors around the world to try and promote various sustainability activities. So climate action is one of our focus work streams. And within that, around 18 months ago, the topic of carbon markets was one that came up quite significantly through exchanges contacting us saying that they are being approached to develop these markets. Some of them are already active. Many of them were struggling to work out what is the best way to get involved and how do they need to go about it. So at COP27 last year, we released a market monitor just with some brief FAQs on VCMs. The response to that was phenomenal, and we realized that exchanges needed more guidance. And so for the last year, we had been working with an advisory group from around the world and across capital markets and the carbon markets ecosystem to develop a guidance for our exchanges on how to maximize the opportunities of carbon markets. That was released at the World Investment Forum in Abu Dhabi in October just this year, so it's hot off the press still. It covers both compliance and voluntary markets, but trying just to distill some really practical ideas that particularly exchanges could look at in navigating this very dynamic environment.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So you already have some of the experiences of the exchanges who want to get into this field. So yes. Next one is Lisa.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Professor Lisa Wilson. I always like to start the fact with that, one, I'm Australian. I live in Estonia, but my professorship's actually from South Africa, and it is in the area of entrepreneurship, innovation and emergent technologies, of which I do specialise in AI, data and blockchain. So I'm also a global specialist in the area of ESG and small to medium enterprises. So for me, I am also the managing director of XTCC, Exchange Traded Carbon Credits, at the moment. Now, that actually is the world's first exchange traded structured financial product listed on stock exchanges. So we've changed the economics of doing the right thing by inviting the capital markets into what we do. Often people say, why did I get involved? Many years ago, too long to remember almost, my very first degree was in accounting, financial management and economics. I've loved the combination of the fact that I can now combine my economic and financial career with blockchain and emergent technologies, which I think are foundational certainly to the integrity of the market, and of course my work with ESG and small to medium enterprises, because one of the things that we do need to recognise is that 96% of the economy are small to medium enterprises. The very vast majority of our carbon credits and our offsetting projects are SMEs, and they are excluded from the capital markets and for many of the other opportunities. So I guess although I'm actually working directly with a financial product, it has its filters into a number of areas. So we'll actually be presenting on in the Estonian pavilion on the integrity in capital markets, which I also spoke about at FII 7 in Riyadh about a month ago. So we'll explore that a little bit more. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Really fantastic expertise here around the non-existing table. But by no means least, Anshari, you come from Gen Zero?
Thank you, Verena. Thanks, Ross, for inviting me to this panel. I'm Anshari, Director of Policy Analytics at Gen Zero. Prior to joining Gen Zero, I was a climate negotiator. One of the tracks that I covered was Article 6 for several years. So at Gen Zero, we invest into tech, nature, and carbon ecosystem enablers, of which these could be direct investments into projects that generate carbon credits. Our carbon ecosystem enabler pillar includes companies and solutions in the value chain that can help scale and accelerate carbon market, one of which is CIX, Climate Impact X, which is an exchange based in Singapore that can help with price discovery of credits. Yeah,
excellent. Great. Thank you to all three of you. Fantastic to have you on the panel. And I think Russ will start with kicking us off.
Thanks, Verena. Anshari, I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind. You mentioned, obviously, you're at Gen Zero now. Your prior life negotiating Article 6. And Rodrigo mentioned this, I think, very difficult friction that we face as market regulators to appreciate the market integrity side, the financial integrity side versus the environmental integrity. And I think we recognize and we'll take credit for that self-recognition that we're not environmental regulators. We don't want to dip our toes into that space because it's not our area of expertise. But these markets are so unique in the sense that they're really not going to succeed or scale unless you can match both the environmental success and integrity with the market integrity. And I use this example myself from a U.S. perspective. We've seen there's a renewable fuel standard in the U.S. which is almost 20 years old, and I vividly remember from the mid-2000s the U.S. Congress passing a law requiring blending fuel with biofuels. And I don't think it was lost on the lawmakers at the time, but what they were doing in creating this credit system was creating a marketplace. And there's been issues of fraud, there's been issues of a regulatory vacuum in that place, in that space. And I think what we are seeing now, and this is why I think IOSCO is playing such an important role with these good practices, is this friction, but we want to be able to resolve and bridge that gap. So with your current experience, with your prior experience negotiating Article 6, what are your thoughts? What are your concerns? How do we overcome these two very different but critically important components of a successful, scalable carbon market? The financial integrity, the transparency of the marketplace itself, coupled with the environmental integrity, the double counting, the permanence, the governance issues that are critical also to a successful, scalable, voluntary carbon market.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. It's a great question. And maybe I'll step back. There is this misconception that the voluntary carbon market is actually quite nascent. It's actually been around for decades. The only reason why there's so much attention to it now is because in the past couple of years it's seen significant growth, right? And this year especially we're starting to see quite a lot of gaps in the voluntary carbon market, and there's a lot of scrutiny, sharpened scrutiny. And I think that's par for the course for any market that's actually growing. One thing that I'd like to distinguish is that the voluntary carbon market, they play an important role in complementing regulatory schemes. What the regulators have not been able to do, for example, on carbon pricing mechanisms, the voluntary carbon market can actually help with innovation and scaling up some of the more recent technologies. In terms of this question between environmental integrity and financial integrity, I think IOSCO is absolutely right. It's worthwhile to separate the two. Right? I think for the market itself, the environmental integrity aspects, there are various layers where the quality controls are increasingly being enhanced. So let me start at the meta level. So when you look at the meta level, you've got now new initiatives by VCM, which looks at benchmarking quality supply. On the demand side, you've got the voluntary carbon market initiative, which looks at credible claims. And then at the standard level, all your programs like VERA, Gold Standard, Puro, even Article 6.4, which is supposed to be the new and improved clean development mechanism, they will have within their own activity cycle and methodologies their own quality controls, right? And now, emerging in the market at the project level, you've got ratings agencies. So all these actors across the entire meta level, standard level, and project level, you've got players who are actually looking at the environmental integrity aspects of it. And I think from a financial integrity, there's definitely room to play, particularly in managing risks around fraud. And I think this is where IOSCO can really play a role in terms of really tightening the financial integrity of such markets. The next point I want to say is that the market is going to be a lot more complex, because previously we've always assumed the voluntary carbon market to be in a separate universe from the compliance market, right? But it's today blurring. And it has started blurring in 2019 when CORSIA, under the ICAO, already introduced market-based mechanism, which allowed independent programs like VERA, Gold Standard, Artries, ACR to participate in an international compliance scheme. And Article 6 itself, there is a section, Article 6.2, which allows countries to cooperate with one another through bilateral mechanisms, and they can leverage independent programs. So one example that I can cite is Singapore is using CORSIA as a benchmark for what could be eligible under its carbon tax. Starting next year, the Singapore government will allow carbon tax liable entities to surrender carbon credits that comply with Article 6 and comply with CORSIA environmental integrity standards towards its, a certain percentage of its emissions liabilities. And that's why the future means there's going to be a lot more complexity, a lot more blurring. Whether there's going to be convergence, I'm not sure. I think this is a very interesting topic, right? Because I think there is always a role for the voluntary carbon market, going back to what I mentioned about innovation and what limits regulators can play and what the private sector can take leadership on. And I think it will be an interesting space. I think for the voluntary carbon market, the players will need to be prepared for regulators to come in a bit more emphatically, whether it's jurisdictions or whether it's bodies like IOSCO coming in to tighten the regulations around carbon market. Yeah, thank you.
Great.
Well, I mean, a lot's going to depend on lawmakers' policy around the globe, right? You know, we live in this bifurcated world of compliance markets and voluntary markets, largely because of a lack of a mandate on the compliance side. If we had a global carbon price or anything like that, that would obviously shift markets toward the compliance side. But at least from a U.S. perspective, not speaking for other jurisdictions, I don't foresee a carbon price or a compliance market emerging nationally as opposed to regionally, which we have. But I think this is an opportunity to see that voluntary market scale, and if we can build the integrity with the help of market regulators, if there's enough momentum and inertia, enough momentum from the private market side, perhaps the official sector through lawmakers can step in, but that remains to be seen. Verena, I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, first, maybe before I turn to Lisa with my first question, I should welcome Riham, who has just joined us. Very good to have you on the panel. I gave everyone else a chance to briefly introduce themselves and their role in voluntary carbon markets. So do you want to briefly come in and do that?
Of course. I mean, a lot of audiences over here, very refreshing to see a lot of audience are interested in the voluntary carbon market. My name is Riham El-Ghizi. I'm the CEO of the voluntary carbon market. It's a Saudi company, is owned by PIF, the sovereign wealth fund of Saudi Arabia, 80%, and 20% by Saudi Tadawul. And the company has been launched last year, but the project has been announced by the Kingdom in September of 2021. Since then, we looked into the design of the company, what we're going to do about it, because when we started, it was zero supply and zero demand. I'm not boring you, promise me. But I would say when we looked into it with the zero supply, zero demand, we thought, how are we going to go about this? So we thought setting up an exchange on its own wouldn't work. We need to set up an exchange which would help the price discovery. Worth mentioning that 80% of the trades today are over the counter, which does not help the suppliers or the project developers to get the best price. So we thought, okay, exchange, but that doesn't work without demand. We need to have liquidity, and that's why we thought we have 3 business lines: supply, demand, and the price discovery. So for the supply, we have an investment fund. So we're launching it early next year. We're going to go and do co-investments within Saudi Arabia and beyond. And then for the demand side, we have advisory services. We've been on the ground for a year now. We've launched 2 auctions, and I'm going to brag about it. We have launched the first and the biggest auction in the history of the markets with 1.4 million tons. 16 Saudi companies participated from 0 to 1.6 million tons. And we had the second auction in Nairobi, in Kenya, because we thought we're going to walk the talk and go where climate impact is the hardest. In Kenya last year, 4 million people were about starving. The loss of animals were around 2.5 million, which is huge. So we went to Kenya, we had our auction, 75% out of that came from African credits from Egypt. We had from Bimbam project, we had wind from Morocco, solar from Morocco, and wind from South Africa, Rwanda, Burundi, Ghana, and we also had from Kenya, the host country. Having said that, there's a lot of challenges on the ground. As a practitioner, there's a lot of challenges in it. So absolutely. This is the very short, long answer to who I am and what am I here.
No, thank you very much, Riham, because I wanted to pick up with Lisa. You talked quite rightly about the importance of liquidity and demand. And you obviously, Lisa, come with XTCC with the kind of idea of how can we actually create instruments for investors. What do you see currently as the issues where there are gaps, where there are issues that are missing, and how can we as regulators, globally try to contribute to helping the scaling of that?
Again, it's a very good question. And first of all, I'd like to say, when I read the IOSCO report, which we were of course under embargo until today to talk about, the 21 good principles really, and in fact, Rhian would know when I was speaking at RII 7 in Riyadh, I spoke about integrity in carbon markets, and one of the things I spoke about was overlaying Islamic finance principles in the financial world and the carbon markets and the traditional carbon markets, the traditional capital markets, and how those good principles could be overlaid to increase investor confidence. So having seen those IOSCO principles today, it actually works absolutely perfectly to what I was speaking about and will be speaking about on Tuesday. So one of the challenges that we have is that the traditional capital markets, which is where the very vast majority of liquidity in the world still sits, don't have confidence in the voluntary carbon market. They come to us and have been saying, we want a low-risk entry point into the carbon market, but we can't invest, we can't invest in carbon credits. Hence the reason XTCC was actually started, which again it's really in essence a very vanilla product. It's a traditional structured financial product where we pool together high quality, and in fact I coined the phrase at FII 7, high integrity, high quality carbon credits. And I actually specifically spoke about the fact there is a vast degree of difference between high quality and high integrity, because there can be, and to your point, Ross, that we need high integrity in both the businesses that are producing the credits, the financial markets, and the investors who are going to invest in them. And that's about good principles. I also spoke about the importance of technology. And I would say that that's one thing that I'm going to feed back on in terms of the consultation paper, is that we will be reliant on technology to give us the data, the evidence, the provenance of all the information that will input into the creation of high quality, high integrity credits and businesses. And I think we're still a long way from businesses and governments and decision makers understanding that technology. I often talk about the fact that we're into 2023 and we talk about blockchain technologies, and you almost see people recoil at it and take their mind straight to the crypto market. But it will be the core foundation of an integral voluntary carbon market into the traditional capital markets. So for us, XTCC has embedded all of that together, brought ESG principles, democratised the market for SMEs, because if we can drive good governance down into the actual project owners, they'll have better governance of money that goes into those businesses as well. We've included technology, so we've got provenance of credits, but most importantly, we're also saying that the combination of the traditional capital markets and the principles that we have to act under to get listed on a stock exchange is another whole set of due diligence for us as an organisation. That has given investors for the very first time confidence to say, we will invest. And of course it's very interesting because Riam's going to be in a round table that I've got on Wednesday, where we've got sovereign investment funds, governments and institutions for the first time coming to the table saying there's a product we can invest into. So I would say the biggest gap is technology. The second one is confidence in the market, and of course that does come with all the things that we've spoken about, including price integrity and fair market pricing. There currently isn't an index that actually is a hedonic index that actually eliminates all the white noise, and that's again one thing that we've done and included. We could talk about it, I know, all day, but they're just a summary of some of the things that I would say are missing in the market.
Okay, very good. Russ, yeah?
Riam, I'm going to ask you a question to follow up on your introduction. You talked about supply, demand, and price discovery, right? Key components to any successful market. In the context of why we're here today, 21 Good Practices from a global, multilateral organization, financial regulator, it seems like your organization has its act together. You understand what it needs to do in order to create credible markets on the supply side, on the demand side. What's the intersection between what you've done, starting an exchange from the ground up, and having this overlay from a global regulatory body saying, follow these principles, or this is what we recommend from an environmental side and a market side? How is that helpful? I think it's worth having a discussion. How is that not helpful? And what does it mean for you as an organization as you communicate with clients on the demand side and the supply side saying, we have our own standards, we have our own governance, and this is how it intersects with a global regulatory body, or doesn't intersect? Does that create the credibility that you need in order to scale your market and be successful? And how much would you, depending on the consultation, certainly welcome the feedback, how much does that again help you achieve your outcomes and your goals, depending on what we're trying to accomplish, versus does it divert you or take you a little bit off track, depending on what the standards or the practices are?
Okay, let me start step back, what is the size of the voluntary carbon market? What do you think?
I think it's 2 billion.
It's a very small market.
Yeah.
We're talking about huge potential because voluntary markets are about financing and putting incentives in the lack of the compliance, putting incentives to finance or debottleneck finance for projects. This is how I see the importance of voluntary carbon markets. And on the other side, helping companies to accelerate their decarbonization journey to net zero or whatever they have as a target. So what is it needed for liquidity? We're launching the exchange next year, and we are worried about liquidity. How do we have a liquidity? We had 2 public consultations in London this year to design the contract. But I had this conversation with Dr. Mohammed, sorry for calling you again, I always do that, sorry. Having a white list of a country should come and say, this is the white list of what are the credits that is allowable under my market, and hence that will enhance liquidity because that will circumvent any integrity or questions around that. That will enable liquidity in a day and night.
Yeah.
So this is requested from countries, and you've alluded to that when you were talking about Singapore and what they did. So this is a very good practice to have. Another lever and tool we looked into liquidity, and Professor Lisa talked about, is Islamic finance. One of the things when we were looking at the design and I was thinking, what do we do? I'm not an expert in Islamic finance by any means, but I discovered that it's $500 billion in Saudi Arabia on its own as a country. And then globally it's $2.2 trillion. And this is where I thought, okay, fine, if you can have carbon credit offset as a commodity backing the finance, that would be a lever that we could use. Now, there are some challenges, not easy, but we managed to get last year 2 fatwas. We went and sat with clergymen, with clerics, Islamic clerics, explaining to them the importance of carbon credits, and this is a pillar for Islamic finance, how it benefits humanity, the humankind, and this is very authentic to Islamic finance. And we had 2 fatwas last year, one from the ISDB, Islamic Development Bank, and that covers 34 Islamic nations, maybe more, I'm not sure. And then one from the Saudi National Bank. So it took a lot of work to get these, and we're going to pilot that this year. Carbon neutral commodity could be an enabler as well. We have oil and gas flowing from our nations. Carbon intensity should be unlocked. We've heard oil and gas companies yesterday, pledging to reducing their intensity, going to net zero. And that could be a competition for companies to reduce their emissions and use carbon credit offset as a complementary backing commodity. So there's a lot of levers that need to be used for enabling the liquidity in the market. The one thing that I don't support, and I think is going to fall away by time, is the sovereignty of voluntary carbon markets. And I said it in Abu Dhabi, and I'm going to say it again. We see each and every country. I was sitting on the table in Korea saying we're having carbon market. Greece was having one. It is not helpful for liquidity. It fragments the market, and it is the inevitable that some of these initiatives are going to fall away, and then consolidation is going to happen in the market one day or the other. This is the only thing that I would say for liquidity. Hope that answers your questions.
Farina, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, no, I think maybe we can follow on from that, Corley, you have been working in UN SSE to try to get the exchanges. You spoke about it earlier. There's a lot of interest,
Yes.
but we talked here a lot about the issues around integrity, around liquidity, having the demand there. So maybe you can talk a bit about, what the exchanges are looking at and how to get over those barriers. And then maybe following on from what has just been said, the fragmentation. So do you actually see something happening that is also more cross-border, or is it very much kind of on a national level in each country?
I think so. To start with your last question, I think what we're seeing is still very much kind of pockets of conversation. We were really encouraged and blown away by the amount of activity that is already going on. But I think the level of maturity across exchanges varies quite a lot. There are exchanges like ICE, and I see them in the room, and CME and so on, who have been active in this space for decades and who have valuable experiences to share, and others that are quite new and working out what's the best way for them to enter the fray. I think part of the challenge for exchanges also is that exchanges are business entities themselves. Their business models vary, their regulatory authority varies, so some of them can make regulations, some of them can't. So they have to balance what they can do in terms of their own businesses and in terms of the markets and what they do. The challenges that they then also face with is, the expectations of exchanges, and some of the speakers already alluded to that. An exchange is not necessarily in the ideal position to fix the environmental integrity issue. So, it may not be up to them to do a due diligence on the credit that is listed, but what rules and what kind of checks and balances can they put in place to make sure that what they list is something that has integrity. So those are the kinds of things that they are grappling with. Some of the other challenges that are common to the markets themselves are carbon pricing issues, the great variability across the various markets, the regulatory status of the instrument itself. Is another big debate. We were chatting just before this. The US definitely leaning towards definition of a carbon credit as being a commodity. Other markets are taking a broader approach, calling it a financial instrument, which would have various connotations to it depending on where you operate. So those are the kinds of things that they're grappling with. And another one also is balance in policy approaches. So, the kind of guidance coming from IOSCO, I think, will really help a lot to kind of help converge some of those conversations. And you will also see in the guidance document that we put out, what we're encouraging exchanges to do is to kind of take a dual approach. So they need to look at their own market. So what can they specifically design that would be fit for purpose in their market? And that deals with their own regulatory environment, what market type is best for them, where will the demand come from, where does the supply come from. But then also the very, very important thing that exchanges can do is to leverage their market influence. So this goes to where exchanges can do engagement in the policy context to help influence what is happening there, as well as doing education and just helping to demystify for their own market environment, but also learning from others that have been a little bit more active in the space. But as I said, we see a lot of activity, a lot of interest, and across the spectrum of both compliance and voluntary markets, across the value chain, at the various points of not only focusing on the trading, but becoming involved in provision of technology trading platforms, even becoming involved at the level of project development. So there is a lot happening in the exchange environment and a lot of scope for engagement with exchanges around this topic.
It's great. There's clearly far more conversation that needs to happen between the different interest and players in this, and I hope our consultation can also contribute to keeping that conversation going. Russ.
So I think we have like 15 minutes left, so a couple more questions, and then maybe we'll open it up to any Q&A, but one for the entire panel, and Corley, maybe I'll start with you and then come towards me. Standardization, key component to any successful marketplace. Obviously, there's going to be basis risk along the lines, but we want to create standardized products. This particular market is probably demands standardization more than ever, given its global nature and given the sort of outcomes and goals we're trying to accomplish. The good practices address standardization, but from your standpoint, what needs to happen globally to really achieve a level of standardization that's going to enable markets to scale? We can think about benchmarks, ratings. These are the types of vehicles that have been used in capital markets and derivatives markets to create standardized products. Is that the same case in carbon markets, or is it regulatory? Are there other things that need to get done? But again, would love to hear from the entire panel. So Corley, I'll start with you and then go to Lisa afterwards.
That's a tough question to ask, but I think, I mean, if we see what's happened in the ESG disclosure environment and the kind of convergence that we're seeing there, that could be a good kind of a model to think about in this environment as well. The fragmentation is a big issue, but the nature of the products and the projects also are very difficult to define. So I think conversation at a high level is key, and a lot of that is already happening. But I think more of it can happen, and the more we start seeing exchanges also entering the fray, the more we can leverage their experience in standardization of products and coming in of regulators as well. I think one might be wary of over-regulating right from the start, but I think a measure of regulation that allows for flexibility and proportionality and the market to organically develop would be key, because you don't want to stifle the innovation and the growth that we are seeing.
That's a great point, and something that we always, as regulators, should not forget.
Yes.
Lisa, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I've got a few actually. One thing that I'm going to talk about is one of the first points you raised, and it's around standardisation. So some of the work that I've been doing concurrently to this is actually with the European Commission with their EMIR refit program and also their EFRAG program for ESG metrics. There's some commonalities and things I think we can learn from that, from the standardisation process of the voluntary carbon markets and the production of credits. We mentioned a number of times there's a myriad of standards out there, from Vera Gold Standard to the ISO standard, etc. One of the things that we've done with the EMIR refit program is created a common domain model, and I think we desperately need somebody to act on that and to finance a product that we can work on to do that, so that we can truly democratise the world in terms of these SMEs, again, I'm going to say, which can't afford to pay Vera and Gold Standard their annual fees for their accreditation standard. So I think we need to have a common domain model where every project can plug into and say, well, this is what I match and this is what I don't match, etc. And it's all digitally done. So I think that's the first thing that I would talk about in terms of standardisation. Alongside of that, of course, is the EFRAG program, which is ESG, and I think there's a common alignment. With that, I'm going to again talk about technology. One of the roles that I do have is I'm one of the advisors for Carbon Base, and our Carbon Base is the first truly digitally native registry for credits out of the ASEAN region and APAC region. One of the perfect use cases for technology for a carbon credit is what you would commonly know as an NFT or a non-fungible token. I don't like the term because it is a digital authentication instrument, but it is the perfect tool to guarantee the unique features, whatever they are, of a carbon credit. It absolutely 100% guarantees our provenance and so forth. So I think there needs to be a lot more knowledge around that technology. So I think that's key. So standardisation, technology, and for that I would also say very much so, and those that know me would definitely be education. And the reason I say, and that's not just of the project developers and so forth, it is for our traditional capital market regulators. Being a listed product, so we've listed with London Stock Exchange, Deutsche Börse, Bermuda, and a number of the other stock exchanges around the world, including Switzerland, who is our paying agent. When they came back to us with questions, they were quoting Interpol reports from 2010. And that was their level of knowledge and concern and fear and frightened, responses in terms of the carbon market. So I think there needs to be a great deal more education into those who are actually sitting in behind our regulators, the same as we have had with digital assets and crypto assets, to clarify what actually is true and what's not. And I think so. One of my key points in the work that I've been doing here at COP and will continue to do is we need to have clarity of voice. Those of us who are leading the space, we need to demystify the space by having clarity on how all of this can come together and we can actually overcome the challenges to give people confidence.
Thanks. Anshari?
Thanks. I'll speak to standardization vis the 3 vulnerabilities in your report. So the first one, I think, is around disclosure and claims. I think on this front, you've got the VCMI, which just launched its claims code. I think that there will be a gap, there'll be some time before it gains serious traction in the voluntary carbon market. but there are already attempts to kind of standardize what is good claims with regards to your targets. On the disclosure side, you've got ISSB, which kind of harmonizes all the disclosures and reporting. And so you're already seeing developments around standardization across the vulnerabilities. The second one that you spoke about in your report was around trading environment. And I think this is where I go back to Riham's earlier point about liquidity. The challenge that we have today is liquidity in the carbon market. And that is actually preventing exchanges from really scaling up and enhancing price discovery and price transparency. I couldn't agree more with the point made that 80% of the market today is OTC, and only 20% is via exchange. So the exchanges are really developing standardized contracts, standardized products, futures contracts. And so I think this is still a gap that needs to be closed. But this gap can be closed if the first vulnerability around environmental integrity and the third vulnerability around the disclosures and claims are addressed. Because I think with that you get greater confidence in the carbon market and the use of carbon credits by corporates and other entities. And the first one, again, I go back first at the meta level. You've got ICVCM looking at benchmarking quality. So at least for the majority of investors and buyers out there, you could refer back to CCP labels to look at what credits would be deemed to be of high quality. There's others like COSIA also, which could be other reference point. And the COSIA standardized contracts today will be very different from the COSIA standardized contract next year, because the requirements for the next phase will be very different. So the prices that you see today will not be reflective of the prices that you see for COSIA eligible credits next year. Within the programs, you are starting to see standardization also. So I'll use Vera as an example. A lot of the criticism this year is around REDD+, which is forest conservation activities. So they've just released a new consolidated methodology around REDD+, and that seeks to standardize the different approaches towards one particular project type, right? And that's a positive development. Traction remains to be seen, and what it means in terms of operationalizing and executing a project on the ground, in terms of the costs, additional costs needed, that remains to be seen also. And between standards, they are also starting to work together. One example is Gold Standard and Vera are collaborating on jointly reviewing new methodologies around green hydrogen carbon credits under the H2NZ initiative. So even across the different programs and standards, you are starting to see standardization. I think this augurs well for the carbon market, but you have to bear with the carbon market itself, because I think it will take probably 1 to 2 years before it gets up to speed with all the new developments that we are seeing this year.
Yeah. Ram, anything to add on standardization?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything almost was covered by my fellow panelists, but I would say a couple of two experiences that I had. First of all, the carbon accounting. I was trying to take tax exemptions from the Saudi government authority, and we did a study. How is carbon credits treated in each and every country? Some countries, Colombia, I think, treats it as a commodity, some as service, some would treat it as based on your judgment. That's in the UK. And I heard that Egypt treats it as a financial instrument. So this does not help at all. So maybe there should be some under the United Nations, somebody that would help standardize. And then the last thing that I would say on, so we talked about taxes, accounting, value-added tax. Do I pay value-added tax when I import or not? So these are things that could and would be enabled by IOSCO maybe. So somebody needs to come up with leadership and help. One last thing, I would say countries would come up with taxing credits all of a sudden, like Zimbabwe came last year and said 50% will be taxed. As a project developer, does not enable me when I don't know what is going to happen to my capital. So I even talked to the Kenyan president. I said, if we bring 4 or 5 African countries and saying, this is going to be the tax framework for East Africa, that could help as well project developers to identify and would help de-risk a lot of financing. So these are the two things that I've seen on the ground and I wanted to share.
So I think we're rapidly running out of time. I don't know whether there's any burning question from the audience. I see 2 hands up, 3 hands up. I think I will have to keep it, maybe just ask you 3 to ask your question very briefly, and then give each of the panelists just 2 minutes to respond. Mohamed first. You have to shout, I think. No?
So the first question, do you still think, or do you genuinely believe that carbon credits are purely commoditized? Because I believe in the calculation, through the methodology, the different methodologies to calculate how much you have reduced the carbon emissions, there is value judgment. So assuming that carbon credits are purely a commodity that can be standardized to the point of no differentiation is very wrong, from my own personal point of view. So this is a point that needs to be discussed, or at least you can, if anyone has an answer. The second point for Reham calling me out, I'll call her out now and tell her, come get regulated in Egypt and I'll get you the white list that you want of projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Mo. There was a question at the back. The mic is coming, I think.
Yeah. So very quickly, name is Pedro Barata. I'm with the Environmental Defense Fund, but also co-chair of the expert panel of the ICVCM that has already been mentioned. So as ICVCM self-appointed representative here, the question would be to the panel, what do you see, one, the role for any potential collaboration between the exchange world, put it this way, and self-regulatory bodies like ourselves? And if you had a request from us, put it this way, what would it be? Thank you.
Okay. And finally, no, I think we are running out of time, I'm afraid. I'm going to Philippe there.
Thank you very much. I'm Philippe from Abu Dhabi, and we have set up this carbon exchange in ADGM, as you may know. Quick question. I agree with all what was said, very interesting, but what about the registries, where clearly it's more on the environmental integrity side, because this is not our job as financial regulator, not to regulate registries. But who is taking care of them? How can we make sure that there is more interoperability between them, and make sure that the best practice are really implemented? For me, it's still a mystery. Is it best practice? Regulators are not going to impose. We do that indirectly through our commodity exchange on the market. We do, but it's indirect. So my question is, who is taking care of the registries? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I maybe suggest each of you pick one of those questions and try to respond? Who would like to go first?
Mohammed's question is way too complicated.
I'm going to tackle Mohammed's. I'll go the difficult one. I absolutely 100% concur and agree. Because I'm a world expert in ESG, and I think there's some common alignment here, you can't make anything an asset or commoditize it unless you can measure it. And so I think you are correct. Where there are value judgments, and then we have the same issue when we have ESG measurements, we have to be able to quantify those value judgments, and we have to be able to use technology to do that, so that what we are saying we can measure. And it's no different to when we say we've made an impact on an SDG, and I would go, how? Unless you can actually validate it. So I would say absolutely, you're 100% correct. We need to. The carbon markets aren't perfect as they are now, but that's where we need to start, and that's where we need to move towards. I think that's what I would say.
And Shari, you wanted to come in?
Maybe I'll take the last question and also Pedro's question.
Yeah.
So on the registries, previously they have been self-regulating, but today you've got bodies and initiatives like CORSIA, which is under ICAO, looking at the integrity of the registries themselves. So Vera, Gold Standard, what kind of processes they have in place that avoids double counting, ensures tracking of credits and whatnot. And also ICVCM, the latest one, assessing registries at the programmatic level, in addition to the methodologies. So I think there are going to be checks and balances at the meta level, which I've mentioned earlier. So that's on the registries front. I
Can
think
we
on
maybe give someone else a chance on the
I'll say something on the registries as well, what we're doing in our market. We're having credit rating agencies. So to rate all of the thing, and we're availing that for free for all of our buyers. So this is something that we looked around it. We welcome ICVCM, what they have done, and we will report that with transparency on the exchange. And last but not least, we have due diligence teams, and it's a lot of work on us. So all of the auctions that we have done, I had 2 separate due diligence teams reviewing each and every project, and any red flag I would exclude. So really looking for credit agencies to bring a lot of value to the market when it comes to that, and ICVCM, of course.
Any last word, Corley?
No, I would concur with that. In response to that, I think there is definitely scope for conversation between exchanges and the likes of ICVCM and so on, in just helping define the boundaries of what an individual exchange can and want to do in a particular environment. And just also to congratulate IOSCO on the release of the principles. I think certainly from the work that we've been doing, it's going to be extremely useful to exchanges and regulators.
Thanks so much. You want to close?
We're about to get kicked off. Thank you for everyone. A round of applause for the panel. Thanks.